Fart start.
Fart start.
Fart start.
Hello and welcome. I am Light, and this is my podcast. Today, I have my co host, Jory. Say hello, Jory.
Hello, everyone.
We have moderator Maya, of course. So please be nice to moderator Maya. And of course, producer Jeremy is here as well. Today's topic is the mysterious and the unexplained missing person cases from America's national park system. America's national park system has roughly 640 million acres of federal land, including national parks, national forests, and the Bureau of Land and Property Management. So there's a lot of places to get missing. Here's the thing. We're going to talk about the strange and the unexplained missing cases. There are cases that can be assumed that maybe somebody wanted to disappear. Maybe they parked their car in a national park, they got out, they walked away, and they left their life and they don't want to be found. There are cases where somebody maybe went into the park and committed suicide. There are times, unfortunately, where there is a possibility there were abductions. Somebody kidnapped somebody from their campground. But what we're going to talk about is some cases that those explanations don't fit these cases. And there is unfortunately a lot of strange, creepy, mysterious disappearances in national parks. So settle in and be prepared to never want to go to a national park again. Do you have anything you'd like to start by saying, Jory?
Yes. Um, so there was this one time when um, I was younger and you took me to a national park and I got lost. And I encountered aliens that took me away and then brought me back and told me to never speak of it again. And I want to use this platform to tell everybody
Um,
today that it's aliens.
if you were told never to speak of it again, I think you're going to be in trouble right about now.
Well, I've been doing this podcast for couple shows now, and I've been relatively unscathed. So I'm going to keep pushing the buttons until they confront me.
Well, at least one of us has been.
No,
Okay.
I was going to say, seriously, though, I really hadn't researched this subject until you brought it up to me as a topic to discuss. And seeing some of the stories that I've read it's really eye opening to know that there's not just hundreds, but thousands of unsolved cases that are not just, like you said, somebody that pulls up in a car and decides, they want to be done with society, they're done with their life. There's evidence to suggest something isn't right. So it was really fun researching this topic, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Good. I'm glad. I found this topic, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. And I was really shocked to see the large amount of people with unexplained disappearances in the national park system. In general, people tend to go, if you're going to go to a national park, people tend to go in groups rather than alone. So you would think that it's safe, nothing's going to really happen. You're not certainly not going to disappear without a single trace, right?
Right.
So it's interesting that there's so many people having gone in groups where it's a family, they're at a cabin, everything's fine, you're on a vacation, the weather's nice, nothing should go wrong, and then everything goes wrong. And they never see that family member again. And that's the one thing I'd like to say about this topic is this. Now, I have certain cases that I am particularly interested in, but I don't want to do this podcast as like this is my favorite, or something like that, because I would like to keep in mind that the fact of the matter is these are real people with real loved ones. Oftentimes they're real children, and their families are still alive and missing them. So, while we talk about those subjects, there'll be lighter moments, of course, but I want everybody in the comments and everything to keep in mind that we are talking about a horrific loss for their family members. Is that okay, Jory? Are you okay with that?
I think I can handle it.
All right. Later on, you can tell us about your probing. Okay.
Yeah, they didn't use metal instruments, by the way. So
Well,
years and years
that's
of therapy, and not just from being your son.
oh
But
oh.
yeah. High five, moderator Maya.
My moderator Maya high fives you back. Moderator Maya is gonna be missing from the will.
All right, this getting cray cray. Let's get started.
Okay, here we go. I want to talk about David Paulides. David Paulides is a cryptozoologist, and he was also a former police officer. He was a police officer for 16 and a half years. Sometimes that's rounded up to 20, but it was 16 and a half. And we're going to talk about him because a lot of people get very, very mad if I do a story and I don't say David Paulides. So there are other people that do these investigations, not just him, but he is the main person who has written several books about this. And the way he became famous as an author through some self published books was that he believes that there is a Bigfoot, many of them out there. And so he spent a great deal of his life investigating Bigfoot claims and trying to prove that there is a Bigfoot. And while he does not specify what he believes happened to these people in these missing cases, there is an underlying understanding that it is mysterious and unexplained, and there is something happening. But he leaves it up for people like us to have a discussion and talk about, what this could be about. Um, it's interesting to note that David Paulides was also in the San Jose Police Department's SWAT team. So he understands searches and how searches are performed, and that's really a good aspect for when you're talking about investigating how these mysterious disappearances were investigated, because some of them, it's unfortunate because depending on where you get lost, some of them get much less attention. If you're going to be lost in, let's say, Yosemite Park, they have their own special, highly trained task force to find missing people. Where if you're lost in, like one of the cases I'm going to be doing is a county in Colorado, which is the poorest county in Colorado, they rely on um, people who have volunteered to help. They rely on if people volunteer to have let their dogs be used. They use GoFundMe to hire somebody to bring in a helicopter with infrared. So it's really important to note that depending on where you go missing, it affects the likelihood of you being found. Although I'm not sure that that would matter in some of these cases because something strange is going on with a lot of these cases. So, Jory, would you like to? I want to mention one more thing about David Paulides. When he attempted to obtain a list of missing people from just Yosemite National Park, just there, he was told that there is no such document, that they do not keep records of missing people within their park system, which dumbfounds me. I, that can't be true. But then they told him that they could get the information if he wanted to pay $34,000. So, do you have a list or do you not have a list? And why on earth would you charge money to get a list of missing people so that we can find these um, bodies, hopefully, to return them to their families? And when he tried to find a list of missing persons for the entire United States park system, he was told that would cost him $1.4 million. Can you even imagine that you're trying to find a list of missing people and you're being told the staggering amount of $1.4 million to help these families? So he went through the Freedom of Information Act and got a lot of the information from there, which is, of course, free, but takes years to get that information. But it was exceptional that he had to even do that or be charged a huge amount of money just to see the lists and try and help. Anyway, is there something that you would like to say, Jor?
It's staggering to think that this man would have to pay so much money just to obtain a list of missing persons. It uh, it makes it makes you want to believe that there's something more. I don't know if you want to lean more towards the supernatural, if you want to lean more towards, and here comes a conspiracy theory, something more governmental going on behind these disappearances. Why would it take over $1 million for this guy to get just names of people who have disappeared, which should be public domain?
Right.
Um, so it's I want to say it's interesting, but it's also scary to think that there's this weird cover up of why these people are gone. Why do you want these names? Well, if you want these names that don't technically exist, pay us $1 million. Well, wait, what? If these people don't
Yeah.
technically exist, why do I have to pay you $1 million to see their names? It's definitely freaky. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna say that no matter what you land on as far as what you believe happened, whether it's a serial killer, which is, by the way, a lot of traveling and hiking and a huge amount of work. Or it's a Bigfoot, or it's an alien situation. The fact that the government said, "Oh, we don't have a list. We don't keep a list." You don't keep a list of people who are they tag wolves and bears and elk in the national park. They know exactly how many animals they have, but they don't keep a list of missing human beings, including children. I have to say BS to that.
Especially in a
And
national park system that's a government ran piece of property. If people go missing on your property, and it's not like it's just technically it is the middle of nowhere, but it's monitored by the government. You have to
yes,
know. You have to know who's there and who goes missing. You have to. It's monitored. The government owns
yes,
that property. So yeah, if you know how many if you know how many animals you have in your park, you know how many humans are in your park and how many of them disappear. Period. End story.
that's right. I agree. And then, well, we don't have a list, but if you want one, we're going to charge you an insane amount of money we know you don't have.
Right.
Okay, then there's a list. Okay, so do you want to go ahead and start with your story? I'm going to start with the Dennis Martin case when I talk about it, because for to introduce people to these stories, this is probably one of the ones I find the most fascinating. I have talked about this case on a previous podcast, just a real quick thing when we were talking about folklore, actually, which is strange,
Hmm.
but it's a really good one to get people to understand what we're talking about. But I know you have a couple of really good ones. I hate to say this, I hate to call it that. Interesting and unusual and specifically mysterious
It's a
ones.
sad situation, but they're good stories.
They're what pique people's interest. And in the long run, I think that when people's interest is piqued in this type of a subject, I think that in the long run, it will help families, because we're bringing attention to these cases where there was no attention. After the first week, or sometimes, I mean, maybe you have a month or something, after that time is gone for the searching, then they're gone. There's nobody else searching anymore. And for the families, they're left with nothing, no answers at all.
Right.
So I think it's a good thing that these cases are starting to be brought to people's attention, because it will help people. If you're going to go into a national park, I'm not saying don't go into national parks. I mean, I would say that to myself, but I'm not telling you guys not to go into a national park. But if you're going to go into a national park, I think you're going to be much more aware of your surroundings, aware of things that are happening, aware of the people in your party. You're going to keep an eye on things in a way that you maybe wouldn't have before if this had not been brought to your attention. And so maybe there'll be less people at the very smallest hope. There'll be less people that something happens to mysteriously. And if something does happen mysteriously, then maybe there'll be more witnesses who can help immediately. So, do you want to go ahead and start with one of your cases, or?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start by saying that every case that I present to you guys today, I got from howstuffworks.com, and it's top 10 mysterious disappearances in national parks. So if you, as a listener, want to go there after this, I'm just going to read. I think I've got about 3 cases that we're going to go over on my end. But if you want to see all 10, and some of Exit Lights cases are actually on this too, you can go there and read about them as well. But I'm going to start
Yeah.
with
And one more thing, I've done several videos on this topic, and I know that moderator Maya is going to link you all to those topics, I mean, those videos. So don't go now. But afterwards, if you're interested in listening to my videos on these topics, then the links will be here. And if you can't catch them right now because you're in the chat room, or maybe you're watching this after the podcast is put up on YouTube after it's live. The links will be in the chat section, so you can always go in and get those links at a more convenient time. Okay, go ahead, Jor.
Okay. I'm going to start with a little boy named Douglas Legg. And he was 8 years old. And he and his family were heading out for a hike in, and you're going to have to help me out with this again.
Adirondack.
Adirondack. Thank you. Some words my brain just doesn't want to say. The Adirondack Forest Preserves, when his uncle spotted poison ivy. So when he spotted it, he told him that he needed to go put long pants on to protect himself from this poison ivy. And they were staying in a family cabin that they had at this forest. So they knew the land, they owned the land, and this was back in 1971. So back in 1971, if you're telling an 8-year-old boy, run back to the cabin and get your long pants on, it's not it's not in that time. It's not one of those things that you feel like you have to escort him, especially if you know the land, if you've been in this forest numerous times.
Yeah, can I add to that part?
Okay.
In 1971, kids played outside. They weren't inside. They played outside. And this was a family-owned cabin, correct, Jory?
Yes, they owned that cabin.
And kids were told to go outside, and you came back when it was dinner time. It wasn't like today. Like today, I was telling Jory, like today you would send, you know, the a father with him, a doctor, a psychiatrist, and a helicopter to go get his long pants on. And back then, and even when I was a child growing up, even when I was a child, I lived in the country. So by the time I was 8, I was literally riding my bike 3 or 4 miles away from my house with my 6-year-old brother, and nobody cared. It was just how it was. So you can't think of this in terms of, I can't believe those parents would send their 8-year-old boy back to the cabin. This was a place he'd been raised at, he was familiar with, he'd played out for hours. I'm sure they brought cousins and aunts and uncles, and it wasn't unusual. So keep that in mind, that this isn't a situation where the parents were being irresponsible. That is just how it worked. It's how it worked when I was growing up, living out in the country. We came back for dinner, maybe, and maybe not. And then after dark we'd go back out again, and that was how we spent our summers. So go ahead, Jory. I just wanted to make it very clear that this isn't a parent being irresponsible kind of an issue.
So they sent him back to the cabin, which wasn't very far from the point that they were at that time. And they never saw him again. And so it reads, unlike a lot of the kids who have gone missing in national parks, Legg was very familiar with these woods. As we've stated, his family owned the cabin where they were, and was described by his family as being a mini woodsman because they all hiked there together so often. Legg's disappearance sparked one of the southern
Is it the word?
Yeah.
Adirondack.
Adirondack. Thank you. It won't let me say it. One of the southern Adirondacks' largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods. But unfortunately, he didn't leave much of a trail. So in his case, they used dogs for their search, and they were able to supposedly follow his scent for over 30 miles or 48 kilometers for our UK listeners. And the trail that they followed was very, very difficult terrain. How could a young child have traveled alone for such a distance? Some searchers reported seeing bear-like tracks near the site. While black bears do drag their prey to cover, dragging someone 30 miles over difficult terrain seems unusual.
How
The
many miles
family
was
became
this?
desperate. 30 miles.
He was found 30 miles
No, he was
away.
never found. His scent went for 30 miles
His
or
scent
48
went
kilometers.
30 miles away.
The dogs were able to follow his scent for over 30 miles. And what they found bear tracks along this scent trail, but it's not typical of the bears in that area to drag their prey over 30 miles. It's
Well,
they
no, wouldn't you kill them? Don't bears just kill you right there and then hang out and wait for you to like
well bears would
putrefy?
well bears would kill you, and if they had to drag you anywhere, it would probably either be up a tree or a nearby den where they would be living. But I don't see a bear, like if they're centralized near a den, I don't see them traveling 30 miles out of their way for food and then dragging it all the way back through
Well,
difficult
no.
terrain, which animals are not known to do. Animals are always known instinctually to take the easiest trails. So why would a bear use rough terrain to drag a meal 30 miles? It doesn't make
Especially a
sense.
small child. It's not even a large male. It
Right,
seems to me that a bear wouldn't even go 30 miles away from its natural habitat to search for food.
right. Well, this is a forest. A bear is not going to have a rough time finding food. There's going to be deer. There's
Yeah,
going to
that's
be
what I mean.
rabbits. They also eat berries.
Yeah.
So they're not going to. There's no bear in that area that's going to kill a little boy, then drag it for 30 miles through rough terrain. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't make sense.
And then the dogs lost scent of the child.
Yes. Um,
He just what?
he
He
just
just stopped
he just
existing.
he just vanished. The
There was
family
no
became
blood.
desperate. There was no evidence. He left no trail. The only thing they were able to track him by was scent, and they lost it after a 30-mile radius.
So no blood, no ripped clothing, no shoes falling off. Bears tend to maul their victims. There's not going to be a lack of blood. He's not going to pick somebody up, rockabye baby them for 30 miles. It's going to be in his mouth. And I wouldn't even think you would need a dog. You would see carnage.
Right. You would see. You would have. You would have what they would. It's not technically a crime, but you would have what we would consider a crime scene. You would have evidence
Mm-hmm.
of something happening. There was no evidence.
Wow. And they didn't hear the boy screaming
No.
because they didn't carry on. Were they carrying on? Did they keep walking or were they just like kind of waiting for him to come back? Because
It's not said specifically, but I would assume they would not move on without him.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. If I sent my child back to the cabin, I would wait there and they heard no screaming and you would hear bloody murder, right? I mean,
Well,
I just can't even
even
imagine.
if somehow the kid didn't scream, if they're not that far away from the cabin, you would probably hear something still.
Well, you would hear the bear, but I can't imagine that a child wouldn't be screaming for their parents. And that's just
Yeah.
natural instinct.
Mm-hmm.
I want to note a couple things in the chat real quick, okay? Um, ASMR Gold notes that David warns that people not only carry a gun but a personal transponder, and that is a really good idea. That's a really good idea. Like one of those things that the skiers use in case there's an avalanche, so that if something happens to you, they can pick up on the transponder. That's a really good idea. And also, Rob, Petland UK, wants us to reiterate to the people who are in the UK just how much land it is because the UK isn't as obviously close to being as large as the United States. So I want to reiterate that there is 640 million acres of federal lands. And for the record, that doesn't include state parks. So 640 million acres is mind boggling. There could be plenty of things in 640 millions of acres that we never see. never come upon. If they have any type of reasoning or skill, we could never see them. So I'm sorry I took that. Yes, transponder and gun. Yes, both of them. She says that of all the cases he's investigated, none have had both on them because people have gone missing even though they had guns. Even though they had a gun, they still have gone missing, just disappeared without a trace. So if you're going, I think it's worth the extra amount of money to get your family transponders, 100%. And nowadays you could, you know, you can use even iPhones. The Apple Watches, they have a GPS on them. So that is I can't even imagine, Jory, being in the position where your child is never seen again and you have nothing. Which is actually what happened to the family that I'm going to talk about right now. So this is arguably one of the most famous cases in the missing 411 cases. And this is the Dennis Martin story. So in 1969, Dennis Martin was 6 years old. He was vacationing with his family in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains at a popular place that's called Spence Field. Now, his mom and dad, now I know some people on my page have said they've heard this story a different way. And if you have, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. But this is the way that I read the story several times. So apparently, his parents were talking to another couple of campers. They were camping by each other. So him and his brother and another one of the children campers decided that they were going to play a prank on their parents, and they were going to hide behind the trees. If you have children, or you yourself have ever been a child, which is a highly likely, that is something so common that they'll jump out of something and yell boo, to scare you. And that was these kids' plan. They were going to hide behind the trees, and then their parents were going to wonder where they are. Oh, I wonder where Dennis went. You know how it goes. And they were going to jump out and be all boo and scare them. Not really, but you know what I mean. Well, that was the last time anybody saw Dennis Martin. It was him going behind a tree. 3 children jumped out. Dennis never jumped out, was never seen again. Now, here's where it takes a very stranger twist. 6 miles away, another young boy started screaming his head off. And he claimed that he saw what he called a man bear, some very large man, hairy, that had something the size of a child slung over its shoulder. Within minutes, a search party lasted. It was started immediately. It lasted all night, and then it started to rain very, very hard. So the bloodhounds couldn't pick up any scents. There was no footprints. They were stuck. But within a few days, the FBI was called in, the Green Berets were called in, the police were called in, Parks and Recreation and all that stuff was called in. And they never found Dennis Martin. Not a single trace of him. Not an article of clothing. Not bones. Nothing. But then it takes another, even stranger twist. First, the head of the FBI who was in charge of the crew searching for Dennis, committed suicide shortly after with no known reason. His family said that he was not, did not appear to be suicidal, didn't appear to have a reason to be suicidal. And then Harold Cleveland, who was a member of the U.S. Special Forces, issued a statement in 2014. And this is what his statement read, and I'm going to read it word for word so you understand the gravity of his words. Our special forces are never called to assist in civilian operations. That falls to the local National Guard and is approved by the state governor. The fact that they were armed as well is a huge no-no. During my command and every other mission I was aware of, we were not, and that's capitalized, allowed by federal protocol to search for a missing person in a national park or to go in armed. Something is very wrong with this missing kid scenario. I've done some research on this case both while on active duty and after my retirement. The inside facts of this case depict a frightening investigation. Bottom line is that searching started within a few minutes of the boy disappearing and lasted for 3 months, with every resource imaginable being deployed. He goes on to say, don't even start with the terrain was difficult. There's holes, there's caves, there's cliffs, there's creeks, etc. Our special forces can find anything, anytime, in any terrain. We have the highest technology available worldwide and easily the best training and real-world wartime experience and mission-specific experience that the normal civilian populace can scarcely imagine. After studying this case, the fact that no trace, and that's capitalized, of the boy was ever found is mind-boggling. The Green Berets that were tasked in this search were there for a specific reason. They were armed for a specific reason. I can't and won't say why, because my oath documents won't allow it, but I will remind you of these facts. Nationwide, there have only been 4 occasions when the special forces were brought in on a civilian missing persons case. 2 of those involved a possible armed perpetrator. The other 2 were this Dennis Martin case and another one similar to it 3 years later and regionally nearby. This is out of thousands of missing cases since the early 60s when our special troops were born. Now, what took Dennis Martin? What took Dennis Martin that the government responded with special forces, armed special forces? What did that other little boy see? There's something above and beyond a quote unquote normal disappearance. And by the way, Dennis Martin only went as far as a tree next to his campsite. That's as far as he went. A tree next to his campsite. He didn't go running off. He was behind a tree and disappeared from the planet. Special forces couldn't find him for 3 months. He's never been found. Was it a Bigfoot? Is there a Bigfoot? What did the special forces know going in for that one and the other missing child case that happened 3 years later? And they went in armed to the teeth for that one too. And why, if there's something that the armed forces have to go in armed to the teeth and they're still allowing families and children to go into these parks unarmed, unaware, unwarned, that's terrifying. So, what are your thoughts on that, Jor?
Well, I know for Bigfoot believers, this is probably what they would, outside of a body, this would probably be what someone would consider a smoky gun story for a child to disappear and then another child 6 miles later or 6 miles away, see what he called a man bear carrying something the size of a small boy, and then to have the government calling special forces, armed to the teeth, to look for this kid. It's easy to go down that path of that being a Bigfoot, but then it creates so many different paths of, so if the government knows about Bigfoot, why is it being kept a secret? Or if the government knows there's something wrong in those woods, why are people still allowed to camp there? What is it in those woods that needs a highly trained military force to go into it to look for a missing person?
Mm-hmm.
I know another popular theory of cryptozoologists is skinwalkers. They can assume the form of virtually anything when they hunt their prey. So, this could also lead to evidence of possible skinwalkers in the area, which I'm assuming the area that they were in was probably heavily populated by Native Indians prior to being moved on. So, um,
Moved on. That was a nice way to put that.
well, I'm not trying to stir up other issues that we
Yeah.
have, but what I'm trying to say is areas like that area where they were camping for hundreds of years
Yeah.
have had stories
Yes.
of creatures living in them, skinwalker creatures, Bigfoot creatures. What's I don't think the fact that these creatures exist scares me as much is that the government seems to acknowledge they do, in the aspect of sending a highly trained military unit in to go into there to find that boy. So it's scary, to think of it both ways. What's the secret in hiding the fact that a Bigfoot exists or a Skinwalker exists, or at least condemning that area to say, hey, people aren't allowed to camp here. Sorry, there's other places to camp. I don't. It just feels like this Dennis Martin case should have been one and done. Like the government should have said, hey, no more camping here. Because what was it? You said 3 years later
Yeah.
there was another missing child case. So
Yeah.
it just blows my mind. I'm assuming to this day you can still camp there.
Yes.
Why? Why can you
Yeah.
still camp there? This child went feet away to hide behind a
Mm-hmm.
tree and was never seen again with no trace. No
Mm-hmm.
human being, and I don't care how good you are, could sneak up on a camp, take the child without leaving evidence for a special forces team to find.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So why would you still let people camp there? Why?
And what human would go up into a group of people and snatch a child and with the high odds that you're going to get caught, right?
If you're a serial killer, you're going to want no attention brought onto you whatsoever. You're not going to
Exactly.
do it in broad daylight
Yeah, with a bunch of people around, a bunch of
with a
cameras. And
bunch of people around.
I want to add that ASMR Gold added that another family walked up to the Martins, and their name was coincidentally the Martins, and they were never mentioned in the investigation, and they were never questioned, and that the other person that was killed 3 miles away, her name was Trenny, and that it's not weird that they never mentioned this other family in the investigation. Why wouldn't you do that, especially name the Martins? And what an
Well,
odd coincidence.
that just kind of feels like a Men in
You're
Black
right.
situation right there.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly
Yeah.
the government's involved because they sent in special forces team.
Yeah. And
So
the search for them started within minutes. This organized search started within minutes. Like they were sitting around waiting for something to happen.
I wish I could go and just see it transpire that an organized search party was ready within minutes of this child disappearing. I mean, I'm not an expert in these situations. I've never had to deal with a missing persons case, but I feel like it would take longer than minutes.
I know. And ASMR says that they literally walked up to the real Martin family and asked if their kids could play. Wait. So let me ask you. Um, so it was their children that Dennis was playing with when they hid behind the trees? ASMR Gold? I'm gonna see if she'll type in an answer. That would be that feels like you said, like a men and yes, it was their children. That is so bizarre.
So the real Martin's children were playing with the fake Martin's children when
Yes.
Dennis Martin disappeared.
Disappeared. Whoa. What? And they didn't know the family. They'd never met before. They just randomly came up and said, "Can our kids play?" And then, which I can see that happening. I mean,
Well,
I
I mean,
guess like
it could be coincidence. I mean,
as
two
far as
families
asking,
that
can
happen
your
to be
kids
Martin.
well, I'm just saying, as far as kids playing, if my kids were 6 years old and going, "There's people over there. Can we play with that kid?" I would walk over there. But to walk up to them and be like, "Hey, real Martins, we're the Martins. Can our kids play?" And then within a few minutes, one of your children is never seen again, and they're not mentioned in the investigation at all.
So then what happened to this other family? I mean, those children had to where did this other family go then?
I don't know.
Their children had to have seen something unless their children were a part of
Yes,
it.
right. This it says Mr. Martin was watching his son on the edge of the woods and he disappeared. Um, Jeremy just talked in our ear and said that it could be that the special forces were already there to cover up. That part of their job is to cover up something that's happened, and maybe that's why they were there so quickly.
So this all seems very governmental outside of the 6 miles away, a child seeing a man bear carrying a child like something the size of a child with it.
Yeah, over its shoulder,
So over its shoulder.
which I don't think regular bears don't like. Hey, pick up a what's a child-sized animal? I'm at a loss. A fox. They pick up a fox and they throw it over its shoulder and take it home. No.
It
Yeah. See.
just it just
Yeah.
it's weird. Like so I mean Jeremy makes a decent point. Like the special teams people would go in to clean up a situation like that. But then once again, that just goes down the rabbit trail of what I said earlier. So then, if they already knew there was a Bigfoot there and they were already there, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What I
And
mean
and
is
but
this is
maybe they were there for both, because they did stay there for how long did I say? 3 months.
3 months?
So they did stay there for 3 months. So over the course of the 3 months, maybe they were already there hunting for this thing. Maybe there had already been a report that we don't know of and will never know of. And that ranger's test or statement says that he knows what they were looking for. It was terrifying, but that he's not allowed to say. Or maybe he would mysteriously commit suicide. You know what I mean? Like with a gun that doesn't have his fingerprints on it,
Right.
or a real bad car accident. But look how long the distance is between he released that statement in 2014, and this happened in 1969. So it took that long for him to he could have been on his near his deathbed. Maybe think this is the last opportunity I have to say something about this. I don't know. Oh,
It just
ASMR Gold says that David Paulides does podcasts talking about the Dennis Martin case, and he went and interviewed the father in person.
Ooh.
That would be hard.
Yeah, I feel like the dots are connecting here. It feels like there's just a piece missing. Like, now I just want to sit here and just kind of chisel this out. Like why was there? I mean, if it's on record that they were there for 3 months, like this guy came out and said they were there for 3 months.
Yeah.
Does that mean that they were looking for this kid for 3 months, or were they hunting what took this kid for 3
That's
months?
the question, right? Because 3 months, okay. No, I don't think that anybody was expecting this kid to be found alive. So in 3 months, you're doing a body search. So you would have cadaver dogs.
How old was this boy again?
6.
Yeah.
You would have cadaver
no
dogs and
yeah.
Whatnot out there. I mean, especially, you would have cadaver dogs. You would, and they have all the infrared and all that stuff. So were they hunting this thing, trying to find the boy? It could have been both, or maybe they did
and
find.
You mentioned it. You did mention earlier too, and ASMR Gold talked about it a little bit in the chat. There was a rainstorm shortly after this boy witnessed the man bear.
That night, there was a huge rainstorm that washed away any footprints, and they had to stop the search while there was this huge rainstorm.
And she also mentioned that a lot of these disappearances coincide with storms.
I told you that yesterday.
Well, yeah, but she also said it in the chat.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know. You calm your ego down. It's okay.
Do you see what I have to put up with? How many times do you think he was grounded?
More times than I can count.
No, you weren't.
But oh yes.
But she says
that's a different scary story. Anyways.
She says that she knows about these people that were never mentioned, which was a good question. Somebody asked her, "Hey, dude," asked her, "How do you know?" Because if they were never mentioned, how would you know that? And she said that it's because the father was interviewed on a podcast by David Paulides.
Well, no, I saw it like earlier in the chat. She had mentioned that. I believe when you were reading this story, she said that storms seem to follow these missing person cases.
Yes, I'm just saying.
Went over at the notes yesterday.
Yes, I'm just saying that that as to how somebody in the chat knows something when we did all the investigation and stuff, is that she says that she heard it on the podcast with the father. So for anybody who's going to be listening later or listening now, she's explained how she heard that extra information that we didn't find. Okay. Do you want to move on to? Hold on a second. I'm getting a message about this story, so let me. About the Martin child and Special Forces. The unit was on, and this is from somebody who's a former Marine.
Okay.
About the Martin child and Special Forces. The unit was on a hunter-killer mission of reported wild man families. They were there because of the human factor of these wild men. Terminate all involved without it leaking to press and people, hence the surname Quiet Professionals. The loss of funds from tourists would devastate the surrounding towns and county. So I'm not going to name who sent me that message as a side note. But I'll just say that it's somebody who is in the know about these types of investigations and searches and
so this
special forces.
So he's saying that this special ops team was there because they were hunting wild humans.
Yeah, wild. What was the word? I can't find it right now. Wild. Like a human, like Here it is. Wild men.
Well, that's another term used for Bigfoots.
Okay.
Unless
Is
this
it?
was a, well, yeah, yeah. I would have to find the resources on it, but wildman was another term used uh, for Bigfoots.
Okay. Well, this is somebody who knows about the special forces and missions, and he's giving me this information that they were there on a hunter kill mission
For wildman.
for wild men to terminate all involved without it leaking to press and people.
Interesting.
Yeah. And ASMR Gold says that wild men were also mentioned in the missing 411 books.
So I wonder if that implied, I mean, it would have to imply Bigfoot unless there was,
Yeah,
I don't want
I
to
would say
say
so.
feral people in the
No,
woods, but I
no.
mean, this is America in 69, you said?
Yeah,
Yeah. Uh, it just seems to lead more towards Bigfoot.
yeah, I agree. And thank you for that information.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it would make sense they wouldn't want any of the information leaked out because they need the tourist money, but at the same time, like, this is human lives we're dealing with. What's more important? Human lives or, well, I guess money's more important, but I just feel like human lives would be more important than tourist money. Like, find something else to have touristy then, or section off areas of the forest that you can use for tourists.
Well, everything comes down to love or money, right? And it's a huge moneymaker. National forest camping, it's one of the biggest pastimes that Americans have.
Mm-hmm.
So if you announce that there's wild men or Bigfoot, whatever, creatures that will snatch your 6-year-old children up, you don't announce that. And I
Yeah,
don't.
but there would be a 6-year-old boy that would probably be a grandpa right now that would have his own family if this was known information.
In reality, do you think that the government would care that much about that over one boy or whatever? Even 1,600 million, even 1,600 people missing, or in relations to the millions of dollars, billions of dollars that national parks bring in. I mean, we're talking about the government. We know there's
Real,
UFOs, right? They
real,
don't talk about that either.
realistically, I'm not putting anything above the government. If it
Yeah,
involves money, I'm going to assume that's where they're going to go. I'm just
yeah,
saying this as a humanitarian that it disgusts me that we
right.
would put millions of dollars above even one person's life just because we need the tourism. Okay,
Oh
great.
yeah, I
Well,
totally agree.
there's a family that doesn't have a child in their life anymore because you need tourism dollars to line your pockets.
Yeah, how much
It's
is a child's
disgusting.
life worth?
Apparently millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently.
Anyways, on
All
that
right.
lighthearted topic,
Yeah. Let's go to your next case. What do you think?
yeah, sure. All right, Mom. This took place in our neck of the woods.
Okay.
This took place in 1997 to a gentleman by the name of John Devine. So, according to the Peninsula Daily News, Olympic National Park in northern Washington State has a feature that's not as majestic as its mountain
It's
views.
where I got you. It's where I found you.
You know, I felt like reading this article made me feel like a familiar feeling.
You
Like
were
I
a
feel
little
like
bit
I've been here
feral.
before.
Yeah, you were a little
Was I
feral.
one of the was I one of the little wild men?
You were a little wild child.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That explains why I still crave raw meat.
Well, yes. Well, we did have some cats go missing when you were growing up.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, for those of you listening, do you hear Jory or I cutting out? And Jeremy, do you hear it? Because I hear Jory cutting out. Jory hears me cutting out. Okay, so I am sorry about that. I don't know what is happening. So please. Okay. So if
Okie doke.
hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Hey,
That's what I
we're
get
back.
for that's what I get for asking if we were cutting out.
Quit. It's the government. We're asking too many questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's somebody else I want to say. Somebody else, hey dude, said no government is going to care to spend the money for 3 months long looking for a boy. And that's another aspect. The amount of money, the sheer amount of money that goes into a special forces team looking for one child, they're not going to do that. They don't even they
Well,
won't
that
even
just leads into. I'm sorry.
they
Go
won't
ahead,
even
Mom.
pay for hostages. So
Well, it just goes into the question that I asked was, were they there for 3 months looking for a boy, or were they there for 3 months hunting something? Because they'll spend that money hunting something.
yeah, I yeah, exactly. So I think that it brings us back to that's what was happening. The
Yeah.
reality is they were there, they were looking for something, and something went terribly wrong in the meantime.
Right.
Okay, your next story. Sorry, I got you off track talking about your feral childhood.
Anyways, okay. So at least 4 hikers have mysteriously disappeared from this area in the past 25 years, and for those trying to catch up, this is the Olympic National Park in northern Washington State. But the gentleman I'm talking about is John Devine, and he was a 73-year-old man in 1997. He went for a hike into the park from Mount Baldy, which seems like a bully name. Hey, Mount Baldy. The trail is a tough 24 miles or 39 kilometers. And although Devine was elderly, he was an experienced long distance hiker. So this was a man who had spent his entire life um, not just hiking, but hiking long distances in rough terrain. He was an expert. He knew what he was doing. He was there camping with his friend Greg Bowser. And on the day that he went missing, they had split up, with Bowser going off to hunt while Devine took off for a day hike. And Devine was never seen again. The fruitless search for Devine lasted a full week, and here's where it gets interesting. Until a
Okay.
rescue helicopter crashed, killing 3 people and injuring 5 others. By that time, and this is where ASMR Gold will get excited, weather conditions had deteriorated, making the chances of finding Devine slim. Friends and family said that Devine wouldn't want to put people in danger on his behalf, and the search was called off. And then here's a little interesting side note. The search helicopter's crash is as mysterious as Devine's disappearance. Before takeoff, the pilot used a hand signal indicating that he was going to wait 5 minutes for conditions to improve before attempting it. A moment later, the helicopter departed vertically without warning and crashed into the side of the mountain.
Wow.
So,
So he
how
was just sitting
does.
there. He said it's going to take a couple minutes, and then
Yeah, he gave the hand signal to show, hey, I'm not going to take off right now. I need to wait for conditions to become better. And a moment later, the helicopter just took off vertical and crashed into the mountain,
oh my gosh.
killing 3 people.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So it says the weather conditions were horrible. Could the helicopter have been lifted off wherever it was by the weather? it feels like it would need to be in the air for the weather to affect it, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, that doesn't make sense. If it's on the ground, what does the weather condition have to do with it? Especially when he said he wasn't going to be moving.
Yeah, he gave the hand signal saying, "I'm not leaving right now. It's too risky." And then the helicopter launches vertical and crashes into a
Right.
mountain while searching for an experienced hiker who just disappears without a trace. No traces of him ever found. He might have been old, but this was once again during the day. He was an experienced hiker and he vanishes without a trace. And ironically, bad weather sets in to make it harder for everybody to find him. And 3 people died trying to find him.
Wow. That is crazy.
Yeah, that's really
And they
weird.
never did find him.
He was never seen again. Nope.
Gone without a trace.
Gone without a trace. Yep.
That is one of the things that is so scary is how you can just be missing without a trace. Nothing. That
Yeah.
that terrifies me.
It's weird. It's kind of like with death in general, but we'll just keep it to this. It's weird to think that he woke up that day thinking, I'm just gonna take this hike and I'll meet back at camp with my friend, and then he went out hunting, so we'll have food, and then we'll move on the next day. And he was never seen again.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's just an every ordinary day. Yeah, I'm gonna go
Mm-hmm.
on a hike. I don't know why people would go on a hike for fun, but okay.
And it's
And
just weird for
there's
him to be an outdoorsman. This is his environment.
yeah. Yeah, and he was 72, so he's been doing this for a while. He's got an understanding of what's dangerous, what you should and shouldn't do. He's not, you know, just some kid out there on terrain that he's not used to or doesn't know how to hike on. He's experienced. And even then, how do you disappear without trace without there being some evidence of what happened to you? I mean, if he had had a heart attack or if he had fallen, he'd be there.
Right. Right.
Where is he without a trace?
Without a trace. They searched for him for a week. And this was a trail that they knew he took.
Hmm.
And in a week, you couldn't find any physical evidence to show where he went. And it's only a 24-mile hike, which I mean, it is technically a long hike, but in a week, in 24-mile span, no evidence. Once again, if this was a bear attack or if this was
Right.
a predatorial attack, there would be evidence. There was
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Yeah. And like I said, if he had fallen, if he had been injured, if he had died, they would have found
There
him.
would
He would have
still
been
be
right there on the
evidence.
trail.
Yeah,
And even if he had died and 2 days later, like animals got at him, there would still be evidence.
right.
And if they started searching, I mean, there wouldn't have been time for animals. The thought of disappearing without a trace and his poor family, they have no idea if something horrific happened to him. If there is something that the military goes armed to the teeth in to look for.
Mm-hmm. And remember, there was 4 other cases in with the same circumstances. People just vanished, no trace, no evidence, no nothing. So there's something going on in northern Washington that seems to mirror what was going on in Dennis Martin's case.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to get to that Northern Washington thing a little bit later on, too, because it's one of a few places that have a particularly high cluster of disappearances.
Mm-hmm.
There are several places that have a very high chance if you're going to go missing in a national park that it's going to be in these states in Washington. is one of them.
I can attest
Which,
to that.
we grew up. I mean, like you said, lived there for. Well, I lived there for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to do a case of this child who was only known as John Doe, and he was 3 years old. I'm sorry, I have the date, but it looks like I don't have it, but it was something in the 70s. So, yeah, ASMR Gold says, don't go to any place called Devil's Den or Devil's anything. No, seriously. And she said that they were likely named that way for a reason. I completely agree. And I think that one of the cases I'm talking about has something to do with Devil's Den. Oh no, there was a case where a little boy was found several miles away from his family on this really high precipice, seen by two other hikers, and it was called like the Devil's Peak, I believe it was called. And they saw him be jerked backwards off of this. You can't even climb this thing without special equipment. The people that went to search for him had to bring special climbing equipment to get up to this height, and it was several miles away from where his family had been. I think it was called the Devil's Peak, and they saw him yanked off, like his body, like bent, folded, like he was being pulled by his shirt off of this peak, and was never seen again. Was never seen again. So I agree with you. Do not go to anything called the Devil's anything. It's asking for trouble. Okay, so this boy who is only known as John Doe was 3 years old. He went with his family, and they were fly fishing. He was found. The thing about this case that is really odd is that they searched for him for 5 hours. And when they did find him, he was asked by investigators what had happened to him, because they found him miles and miles away. Miles away. I want to say it was 12. But this is the story that he gave to the investigators. He said that a woman that looked like his grandmother, who was also camping with the family, that a woman who looked like his grandmother came up to him and asked him to go with her. He went into this cabin. They both went to this cabin. He said that the room had robots that wouldn't move, and that the floor was super dusty, but they had some type of guns on the floor, some type of weapons. He said that the woman had a strange glow coming from her head. Now, this is a small child, okay? This is a 3-year-old. So, with this, the fact that he had no possible way of traveling as far away as he did, and then this is the story he's coming up with. And then he says that she asked him to poop on a piece of paper, and he refused, and she became very, very angry. She told him that he was from another galaxy, that they had planted him in his mother's womb. First off, this part in particular, I don't imagine a 3-year-old coming up with on their own, saying that I was planted in my mother's womb. And then she told him to go out, go leave the cabin, and somebody will find you in just a little while. Okay, so you think, well, he's 3. The story, could be made up. And somebody left a comment on my channel just a couple of days ago that said, you can't rely on a 3-year-old. The kid was torn up and eaten by animals. But here's the weird part, as if that wasn't weird enough. His grandmother claimed that during this time, when this boy said that he was with somebody that looked like his grandma, she had been dragged out of her tent and she woke up and she had 2 holes pierced into the back of her neck. And she was in a lot of pain, and the investigators said that they did note that she had 2 holes pierced into the back of her neck. So, and she lost all this time from being dragged out of her tent. She lost all this time and then woke up later with the pain in her neck. So, what happened? Was that a case of a skinwalker? That seems a lot more alien sort of based. And the fact that the grandma did have the holes in the back of her neck? What on earth?
It definitely feels skinwalker-ish for something. Well, it would have to have been something to have assumed the identity of his grandmother,
Yeah, used her
or
body.
like you said, something possibly alien controlled her,
Yeah. Because,
implanted
he would trust her.
something in her.
Yeah, he would trust her, right? Your grandma comes up and says, "Hey, you want to come with me?" You wouldn't think twice. A 6-year-old or 3-year-old wouldn't think twice about saying, "Yeah, I'll go with me, Ma," and walking away and not necessarily even alerting his parents because he's with grandma.
Right.
That's not alarming. That's not unusual. That's not something that raises red flags with a 3-year-old. It wouldn't raise red flags with a teenager. So, what happened? And for him to give this description of the room he was in, so a vivid description, and to say that there was robots but they weren't moving.
Maybe they were
And
statues.
yeah, who knows? Who knows what this 3-year-old's eyes are interpreting, right?
Right.
This 3-year-old is interpreting and then saying just what he is capable of. But to say that they told him that he was planted in his mother's womb, that is not something a 3-year-old comes up with. That's not something you would say to me. An adult wouldn't use that term, use those words just, "Oh yeah, and you were planted in my womb." What?
It feels weird that this boy would be let go.
Yeah. Yeah, what was he there for? What was the purpose of this?
Why take him away? Lead him to a cabin, ask him to poop on a piece of paper, and then when he refuses, tell him that he was implanted in his mother's womb, and then release him.
Well, maybe it's because he refused to cooperate. Maybe maybe for some reason, maybe that saved his life.
But if he's only
3, yeah.
yeah, if he's only 3, I'm just trying to rationalize. I mean, you can force a 3-year-old to cooperate eventually, but it feels like it, whatever this was gave up too quickly and just let him
Yeah.
go. Why would you like the letting go part seems weird because you kidnapped a 3-year-old
Yeah.
who is now going to go tell people what it went through.
But maybe it's because she knew that the searchers were coming, because she said, "Walk out, go out. You'll be found in a few minutes, a few moments." So maybe it's possible that what she couldn't finish what she was doing because they got there, because he
But
was
where
found outside,
was
standing
he
there
found
waiting for
outside the
them.
cabin or just found outside in general?
I'm not sure. I don't know. They don't specify that.
I wonder if they would be possible if I wonder if they would they not ask him to lead him back to the cabin?
I would assume so, yes. And if they could get maybe dogs out there too that could lead them back with scent.
Yeah, especially like if you want to lean towards the possibly grandma was being controlled, her scent would be enough for them to find the cabin.
ASMR Gold says that some of the other cases of the children that she's read about in the 411 books, 411, they were taken and found alive, and they also talked about being in cabins in the woods. Some theories mention little people taking children, little people meaning of what we know as fairies. Hmm.
Hmm.
Isn't it strange that the one connection that these children have when they're found is a cabin, which is also
Well, it
used
makes
in
you
a
wonder
lot of.
too.
It's
Is it?
really,
Is it? It makes you wonder if it's even a cabin at all, or if it's an illusion.
yeah. I would say my personal opinion would lean towards illusion, that it's an illusion. It's a cabin. It's something that feels safe.
You would want,
And
yeah, if you're kidnapping a 3-year-old boy, you want to give the illusion of you're in a safe environment. Well, in the human mind, it's believable that there's a cabin in the woods. You think of
yeah,
cabins, you think of woods.
which is also interesting because how many movies and TV shows have to do with serial killers and aliens and ghosts and cabins in the
And
woods?
cabins in the woods.
Yeah.
This is a little off track, but this reminds me of that movie, The Cabin in the Woods. Did
Mm-hmm.
you ever see that?
Mm, I don't. Tell me what it's about.
So pretty much like these high schoolers that are about ready to graduate and go to college, they go camping at this cabin in the woods.
Is it scary?
Um, it's kind of a comedic scary, but
Okay.
it's this cabin is actually ran by a secret government sect that houses like ghosts and demons and monsters, and like it becomes the kids don't understand it, but they're participating in a horror movie themselves, and the government like they inadvertently choose like what monsters or ghosts or whatever kill them, and
Oh,
they play out these scenarios that the government is actually in control of.
whoa.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it just dawned on me right now that the premise of that movie and a lot of these disappearances, like, maybe that was what was like tingling my brain. I'm like, something about this just feels familiar.
Yeah, that is weird.
Yeah, like the government controls these ghosts and zombies and demons and monsters, and the campers like stumble across these scenarios that they inadvertently choose their own path of what it is that's gonna hunt them and kill them.
Well, that's particularly weird considering that really kind of matches what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a little eerie to say the least.
All right. Do you want to go to your next case?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so this took place in 1966, and it happened to a 6-year-old boy named Larry Jeffrey. And he disappeared near the peak of Mount Charleston, which is just a short drive from Vegas. Um, and much like some of the other cases we've talked about, the search for him began immediately after he wandered away from his brothers. And within days, the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David
Where, where was this at?
Paulides told at Mount Charleston, just north of
Okay.
or I shouldn't say north. It just says a short drive from Las Vegas.
Oh, okay.
It says in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest.
Okay.
So then David Paulides in a TV interview told George Knapp, who hosts Coast to Coast AM, which does a lot of work in the paranormal field,
Hmm.
that there were no predators that day. I'm assuming that means animal predators.
Right.
And since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out an abduction by car. The boy just walked into oblivion, Politis said. When Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and foraged berries along the way. Overall, 1,000 people searched for 16 days, but they never found him.
1,000 people.
1,000 people searched for 16 days, and all they found was a trail of half eaten berries and insects, and that was it.
Wow.
Which it kind of, for me in that situation, leads a little bit back towards the wild men, because if the wild, like, if you don't have a ready food source that you normally eat, let's say these wild men eat or prey upon small human children, I'm assuming to sustain yourself, you would probably have berries and insects as well. So what if it wasn't even, what if it wasn't this child eating berries and insects? What if it was one of these wild men?
Okay, first off, this child went missing, and I would think that it would take quite a while before a child would eat bugs to survive, or even know that you could eat bugs to survive.
Well, yeah, he's a 6-year-old boy. I don't think insects would come to him as a food source as quickly as maybe berries. You know, at 6 years old,
berries.
You're still curious about things around you. You still have that childlike, innocent demeanor of, "Ooh, what's this? What's this?"
Yeah.
I could see it being I could see him being attracted to berries, but
not bugs.
I just, unless the kid was starving beyond starving, I can't grasp him eating bugs.
And what was the I mean, how far away? You'd have to be very, very far away. I don't think I would ever, I don't know, just to start eating bugs.
Mm-hmm.
This would have to be miles and miles away from where I disappeared from. And there was no sign that this child had slept anywhere there.
Well, the thing that it bugs me, because he was separated from his brothers, and it was stated right away that there was no way he would have survived one night in the frigid temperatures of where they were. So
why would he start eating bugs immediately?
Yeah, why would he start eating bugs within the day of disappearing
in
the first place?
No.
Berries, sure. But at the same time, how did he get so separated from his brothers to that point that he was already miles away eating berries and possibly bugs?
Yeah, no. I don't.
No.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
Reading it and then listening to, or talking about the stories, it feels like it would be more like a wild man.
Yes, absolutely.
Scouting
the
area.
Yeah, and I have to say that as a parent, if my 6-year-old disappeared, and the story I was getting back was that miles away from there was some quote unquote proof that he began eating bugs and berries, although he didn't make it through the night because it was too cold. My radar would go off so hard to say, "You're lying. This is a lie. This is BS." He either died because it was so cold, or he did not. And I don't believe, and I could be wrong, I don't believe a 6-year-old is going to start eating bugs.
Well, he had, if this was just a normal case of him being separated from his brothers, he wouldn't have lasted the night. He was wearing light clothing, and it was cold where they were during the day.
And that's another thing we should tell people.
Freezing temperatures.
Yeah, that's another thing we should tell people. If you want to go into a mountain range and wear light clothing, do not. That's ridiculous. So many people get lost and die because of the clothing there, or the lack thereof, that they're wearing. It should be common sense.
Mhm.
Bring heavier clothing, just in case. What if you stay a little bit longer? You know, what if it starts to rain and you can't get right back and you want to change into something when you do get into your vehicle? Common sense, people.
It might be
Take some
common
warm
sense
clothes.
for you and I because we grew up at the base of a mountain.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Some people maybe not so
Yeah.
much.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess apparently not. It
Apparently
appears to
not.
be that it's not common sense. Yeah, I know. I think that my personal opinion is that falls more into a wild man scenario.
It feels like it definitely has that feeling of like it would be casing the area looking for prey, and it sees this little child, and it's been foraging on berries and insects as it's been casing and looking, and it just makes sense to me that no little boy's eating bugs within a within hours of disappearing. It's probably,
No.
I mean, the boy probably had already eaten prior to disappearing.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Probably had a picnic or something.
Right. Probably had
And
breakfast or lunch, depending on the time of
yeah,
day of when he disappeared.
yeah.
And wouldn't have survived. He wouldn't have survived very long at night with the temperatures as low as they were.
No, that's
So,
I would like you said, that to me would seem like somebody else eating the bugs and berries, not a child. No.
hmm
And
and
imagine how scared he was. Imagine your kids panic when they get lost at the mall. You know, you're not even thinking about how starving you are. You're panicked. You're in the middle of a panic.
right.
You know, kids panic, their parents panic. Nobody's thinking about within hours, well, maybe I'll just go ahead and eat this roach. No.
Right.
He's not, his mind wouldn't even be in that frame of mind, even as a child. Well, especially as a child. When they
hmm
get lost, it's panic stricken. So that's that's another one that scares me. Don't take your kids into national parks. Okay, I'm going to talk about this one. And this one is a man whose name is Joe Keller. And on July 23rd, 2015, so it's a more recent case. The day before Joe's birthday, his 19th birthday, he had been spending the summer with some friends, and he was from Tennessee, but they had taken a car and they'd gone to Las Vegas and San Francisco and the Grand Canyon, and then they headed to a place called Rainbow Trout Ranch, which Joe's aunt and uncle own. It's a dude ranch. This is in Colorado. It's in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Joe was a competitive runner, an open water swimmer, and an obstacle course racer. His friend that he ended up going on a hike with, Colin, was a member of the varsity cross country team at a Division I Tennessee Tech. They had been going on runs quite a bit during this trip that they had been on. They were in Colorado, as I said, and neither one were totally acclimated to the high altitude, which this ranch that his aunt and uncle own is about 9,000 feet. So they decided that they were going to go on a run, an hour-long run along Forest Road 250. So they both left, and then they kind of went on their own little way. Joe left his phone and wallet at the ranch, and he was only wearing red running shorts, blue trail shoes, and an Ironman watch. So no shirt. Again, dressed lightly. It's summer in Colorado, and it gets hot. By 4:30, so at 4:30, they started out together. Neither one of these teenage kids knew the area very well, but the old timers who live in this area said that a blind man could find his way out of it's called Conejos Canyon. It's very easy. It's a loop. It's very easy to follow. Nobody gets lost. One side is a huge mountain side. The other side is a stream. So it's you don't really veer off. Colin had decided to go up and around and see these rocks that were on top that sit on top of where the Dude Ranch is, and these rocks are called Hope, Faith, and Love, I believe. And so he kind of wanted to take a look at those because the locals had said that these were, they're something you should stop and take a look at while you were there. It's a place that's very respected by the Native American tribes that were in the area. It's a very solemn place, and so Colin decided that he wanted to run up there and pay homage to that and take a look. They have a cross on the rock that's called Faith. Joe didn't show up for dinner. So his two friends, Colin and another one, Christian, drove up and down the road, and they were honking and honking, and they figured that he'd, come out. At 7:30, they had no sign of Joe. So they started a small patrol of ranch hands. They hiked up the rocks towards Faith, which was the closest formation. They thought maybe Joe had wanted to go up and see these 3 rock formations as well. So they went to Faith, and he wasn't there. By 9:30, they had 35 people out looking for him. And his uncle was quoted as saying that if he was hurt, he would have heard them because they were yelling and yelling for him. He either was not conscious or he's not here, his uncle said. So the searchers thought that maybe he had climbed up higher. If he had somehow gotten lost, that perhaps he had some, like I said, on one side of this trail was this very steep mountainside that had a lot of trees. And so they started to sort of look up there because they said that a lot of times when a hiker gets lost, although he wasn't hiking, he was just running, they'll go up to a higher spot so they can get a better view, a better vista to sort of get his bearing straight. Like, oh, there's the ranch. I know where I am now. So they looked up there and there was nothing. At 10 o'clock, they called the Conejos County Sheriff's Department, and they showed up. 2 deputies showed up at midnight. So they call at 10 o'clock and they say somebody's missing. The deputies show up at midnight. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I talked about that where you get lost and how quickly you can be found really depends on where you get lost. And Conejos County is the poorest county in Colorado. This is where they have to rely on volunteers. This is the case where they had to rely on a GoFundMe to get a helicopter to search for infrared. They had volunteers who brought their dogs in to sniff for him. So at this point, it's now Joe's 19th birthday. And it was still in the process of what professional searchers call a hasty search, which is called quick and dirty, and that focuses on the most logical places. Where are the most logical places, like the rock formations and the trail, obviously. He never showed up. The next morning, they decided to go ahead and call Joe's parents and tell them that they didn't know where he was, and they were there within 24 hours. They got there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and by 6 a.m., the professional searchers were searching. And they started at what was the last point that he was seen, which is what they said that would be the area of the ranch. They had been jogging down a road right in front of the ranch, and a woman had been outside, and she waved at them and told them that they should hustle. And so them being 19-year-old guys, they started to race to impress this girl. And that was the last point that anybody saw Joe alive. So they brought in several dogs. One of these dogs hit on Forest Road 250 and wouldn't leave it alone. Kept alerting and alerting and alerting. But the other dogs that showed up, I think there was 11 more dogs that were brought, they were hitting on a whole bunch of different areas. They couldn't decide. They were all over the place, all over the map. But this one particular dog kept hitting at this one spot. But they looked and they searched, and there was nothing there. So they started searching in different areas. In the first week, the search ended up with 15 dogs, 200 people, and these people were on foot, on horseback, and ATV. And then they were able to get an infrared equipped airplane, which they had to pay for from a GoFundMe fund. And somebody volunteered and flew their helicopter into the canyon to look for Joe, to see if they could find Joe alive or injured. And then there was a man who used a drone, and he went over the steep embankments and looked, as best as he could through the trees. They call it that the trees were birthday candled, so not necessarily a thick wooded area, so the drone could get a pretty decent view of the side of this mountain. And then, of course, they went to the rock formations, and they eventually ended up offering a $50,000 reward. After a few days, because these were people volunteering their time, they had to go back to their lives, and they had to go back to their jobs. And he wasn't found. Then there were some people who said that they had seen him. A woman who was a tourist had a time-stamped receipt from a gift shop, and she said that she had sworn that she saw two men on the road together, but later on, when they questioned her, she admitted that she had lied about that. A psychic got a hold of the family through Facebook and said that Joe was in Sedona, Arizona, which, if you're not familiar with the United States, is a pretty damn long walk. You're not gonna do it. That doesn't even make sense. Then there was a theory that he had possibly been kidnapped. Somebody told him that they heard people talking about him being kidnapped so that his organs could be harvested. His father, after 10 months, said that they felt like Joe was not on the mountain. A year later, Joe Keller's remains were discovered. And they were discovered in the Conejos Canyon on Forest Service Road 250, where that dog kept hitting and where 1,000 people had searched that area because the dog was insistent. He was not there when they searched. A year later, hikers found his body there. A year later. So that leads to the question, with all these people looking and the infrared, and the infrared was started within a day, and the dogs hitting on the area where he was found a year later, and all these searchers searching through that area. He was on the trail. Hikers found him on this trail that the people who have lived there for ages say is impossible to get lost on because it's just a big circle with a creek on one side and a mountain on the other. You can't go far. And hikers found him on that trail. Where was he for a year? What happened to Joe?
That's a pretty wild story. Um, I don't even know how you answer that question. He was found a year later after all those people searched that exact same area and never found a trace of him.
Mm-hmm.
And then hikers find him a year later,
Just hiking.
just hiking, not
Yeah.
even trying to find him. They were just
No.
hiking, and there he was on the trail.
Yeah, and he had been there during the summer, so it wasn't like some cases when they find a body later, it's because they were, under snow or whatever. No, it was summer. His body hadn't been torn up by animals. He was there a year later in the area that so many people had searched, and the infrared and the dogs, and why were all those other dogs confused, but this one dog wasn't? And was it because something had taken him? And so they were confused by the different scents, or the fact that his scent wasn't maybe in a straight shot. It's very, very scary and strange.
Yeah, I have. I don't even know what opinion I could give on that. That's really weird. Um,
Yeah, and imagine this is his aunt and uncle's place. This is where they not only live but have a business, and they take people on horseback rides on this trail. They were out there within that year. It's a dude ranch. They take horseback rides on this trail.
is
Nobody found him.
this in southern Colorado?
Yeah.
Because if we're trying to look at this from what could have done this, um, this general, well, Southern Colorado, Arizona, and the four corners of the states tend to
Yeah.
have high reports of UFOs.
Right.
Um, as a matter of fact, um, I believe it's in Arizona. I think we've even talked about it. Skinwalker Ranch
Yeah.
has a ton of UFO, ghost, skinwalker, anything paranormal you can think of and name it, this place has it. So maybe this isn't one of those cases. Maybe we're looking at finally something that leads more, because these dogs, their scent trails were all messed up. They were trying
Yeah.
to go one way or the other, except for one
Right.
particular dog.
Right.
So maybe they were sensing, because they don't just sense smell; they can sense EMF as well. Maybe they were
Oh yeah.
sensing a disturbance in
Yeah.
the air. So, um, and it's a dude ranch, so it's not like it's going to be around a ton of civilization to begin with.
Right. Right. That's right.
Um,
And so something maybe something extraterrestrial took the body and
I
then brought it
mean,
back a year later.
if let's say this in theoreticals and hypotheticals, if he was abducted from that trail, they did whatever they did to him, and he passed away. They would probably dump him back where they found him. It would make
Mm-hmm.
sense that
Yeah.
they would, like a year later, after this trail's been searched by hundreds of people and they had infrared cameras and drones and all this equipment, a year later he's just, oh, it's just right there on the trail. It would make sense, if you want to look at it in that term, that they would drop him where they found him. Maybe he was on that
Right.
trail when he was abducted and they put him back where they found him.
Why would you? It's so strange because no matter what happened to him, why bring him back? You know what I mean? Like, once you have him, why bring him back? And there was no sign of There's no sign on his body of any trauma.
So this wasn't a completely decomposed body.
No, according to everything I could find, it wasn't a completely decomposed body. Not completely decomposed.
So there's no way he was dead, and a
Although
year later
they did
his
have to do
body was
DNA
that
testing
low.
on his body to make sure, which was, I mean,
Well, a year later, exposed to the elements, he would have just been bones and shreds of clothing.
yeah. So, yeah. And there was enough to do DNA evidence. And the thing is that, like, under normal circumstances, a body being out in Colorado, you would expect to find the bones sort of scattered everywhere from animals.
Mm-hmm.
So, I
Hmm.
don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have another story that you want to tell?
No, I'm all used up. I believe the last one's you.
Okay, well, I just want to touch on one that I did a story about recently, and this one is one that I'm particularly interested in because it happened in Crater Lake, Oregon, and I lost a very, very close family friend who died in Crater Lake, Oregon. So this one caught my attention, and this is a very, very strange missing person case too. Although they did eventually find his body, but the way they found his body is very weird. So this is in 1974, and it was a 19-year-old whose name was Charles McCullough. His friends called him Chuck. He was living in Virginia, and he decided that he was going to go around the country and see the sights and, take some time. And, 1974, he was going to find himself. So in late January, he was in Eugene, Oregon, and he decided that he was going to go to Crater Lake and he was going to take some photographs because he was a photographer. He was That's what he was going to do with his life, was photography, and he was a very, very good photographer according to everybody who knew him. So he went to Crater Lake, and what happens after that is a mystery because 7 feet of fresh snow fell on Crater Lake the day that he went missing. So, for those of you who aren't used to snow, fresh snow is not something that can support the weight of a body. It's powdery. You would fall into it. But when Charles was found, he was found 12 miles away from the last place he'd been seen in Crater Lake. He was found with his, well, let me explain this. Parts of him were found. Well, one particularly creepy thing that was found was his jeans sitting on a log. His shin bones were in his jeans. He had socks on, but no boots. And his foot bones were in his socks. His belt was unfastened. There was no shirt. There was no boots. Other bones were scattered around. But here he was, 12 miles away, sitting on a log, part of him. And his money was gone, and all of his expensive camera equipment was gone. And it was impossible, physically impossible to get to this very, very, very remote part of Crater Lake. There's a rim that people walk around, And what Crater Lake is, for those of you that don't know, it's a crater. It is a lake in the top of like a volcanic area, and it fills up and makes this lake. No, you don't go swimming in this lake. People can go boating, but it's very rare. It's mostly a sightseeing type of place. It's a national park. There's an island in the middle of it. I have been here myself. It's stunning, simply stunning and pristine because nobody screws up the water in the lake because it's not, you'd have to go down 1,500 feet from the sides of this crater to even get to the lake. There's no boat launches. You when my friend who passed away at the lake fell down the side of a crater, and they had to leave her body there for 24 hours because they needed special equipment to get down the side of the crater. So it's really for sightseeing. It's really for hiking. It's That's what the area is used for. So the far off areas that are harder to get to, really hard to get to, people don't go in there. It's very, very, very rare that people go in there because there's no trails and um, snowmobiles can't get through there. And on this particular day, with 7 feet, imagine that 7 feet of snow, no snowmobiles could get through there. His father, Charles's father, asked the FBI to come. And once they found his body, parts of his body, the FBI came to investigate because it was in a national park. And they said that they came to the conclusion that it was impossible. There was no way that he could have gotten there. He didn't have snowshoes, and even if he did, the snow would not support the weight of his body. Their conclusion was that something had taken Charles and dragged him to the remotest part of Crater Lake, which is heavily forested, and put him on a log, like sat him up on a log, which would be impossible to even see because it was buried by 7 feet of snow. So the parents refused to believe that it was anything other than some crazy guy who lives in the woods because Joe's money was gone and his camera was gone. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of animals. So something could have easily have taken his camera, taken his wallet. It was in a backpack. They found his ripped backpack. His backpack was ripped. And that's how one of the ways they identified that it was him because he had a Volkswagen bus like Scooby Doo's, and it had an unusual key, and they matched it with the key that was in his records as a missing person. So the question is, how was he taken 12 miles away through 7 feet of snow and then placed on a log where he could be found when it wasn't snowing and after the snow had melted?
I don't know. The physics of it is you want to say it's like human involvement because his equipment was gone, his money was gone,
Right.
but uh, to be able to drag him 12 miles through 7 feet of snow, fresh snow, the physics of it, that one's hard to explain.
Yeah.
And then just to prop him up on a log and be
Yeah.
done with it, it's, I don't know.
Yeah. It's very, very, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. I can't explain it. I mean, you have to be taller than 7 feet to drag somebody through there, or you're buried.
Yeah.
This is untouched land. There's no snowmobiles there, and they couldn't go there even if there was. It's wooded, highly wooded. So going through that much snow, you could run into a huge log. So it's untouched land. You have to be taller than 8 feet or 7 feet. And that means, I mean, and much taller, because at least you want it to come to your chest, right?
Right.
To plow your way through that. How are you doing that? How is that possible? Or was he taken and then brought back and, like Joe, placed somewhere to be found?
Well, if you wanted to place him somewhere to be found, would some of the most remote woods in Crater Lake be it?
I know. I know. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I I don't know. Maybe I they could have put him in a more likely area to be found, right? That would seem smarter, but then
I would
maybe
feel
they be
like if you
seen.
wanted him to be found, you
Yeah.
would.
But then maybe they run the chance of being something runs the chance of being seen themselves. So I just don't think that the explanation is possible that this is done by the hands of humans. Yeah,
Well,
ASMR Gold
yeah,
says there's nothing logical about this case, and that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. It can't
yeah.
be explained away with he wandered off, and nobody wanders off in 7 feet of snow. And like I said, this is an area that you go to that's purely for mostly for sightseeing. So they have a huge lodge area, which has a gift shop and stuff. It's a very large lodge area, and then there's a parking area right there. And the crater is roped off with metal. I don't know what you call them. Metal rope. Can't think of the word. But if you're gonna take
Bars.
pictures, sort of not that entwined metal that's really thick. It's not bars, but it's like entwined, like a metal, really thick metal type of a yarn. Cable. Thank you, producer
I was.
Jeremy.
I wanted to see how far she was gonna take it.
I
It's like a metallic yarn.
adoption. It's adoption time.
I'm sorry.
So my point being that normally a person who is going to take pictures would stay on the trail, and even then without much snow, I would assume they probably go in with little snow plows and do a decent amount of the trail so that people can go and see the mountain, the crater in the snow. I mean, it's Oregon, it's a mountain, it's going to have snow a decent amount of the time. So I'm sure they go in with little snow plows on the trail and for a certain distance, and that's logically where he would go and take the pictures from.
Right.
Most pictures taken of Crater Lake are taken from the sky because of the difficult nature of this place. So I understand why his parents want to stick with it being a human thing because his wallet and his camera were gone, but it just doesn't seem possible that is what happened.
Well, the wallet and the camera disappearing could be a number of things. I think it's just easier for grieving parents to say, well, it had to have been human. It had to be some psycho because he stole our son's money and camera are gone. Well, a lot of things could have happened to that money and that camera.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about something for the end of this. And I want to talk about this is from a place called Down the Chupacabra Hole, which has no interest to me, but we're going to go down the Chupacabra Hole. And it's talking about clusters of where these disappearances happen. And it says this. One of the first things that was discovered were the presence of clusters throughout the country. These locations are hotspots where individuals disappear at surprisingly high numbers. Concentrated areas are present in many states, including California, Colorado, Washington, Georgia, Michigan, and Arkansas. There are 52 clearly defined geographical regions that are identified. And I think, Jeremy, are you putting the picture of that map up? Okay, so if you are looking at your screen, you can see where these clusters take place. There's a huge one in California, the California, Nevada type of area. Lots in Oregon and Washington, and then they talk about certain characteristics that come with the missing person cases, that most of these missing person cases have a lot of these characteristics in common. And when I started reading these, I was really struck by how bizarre it is that they do have this in common. So I'm going to tell you guys about these particular characteristics. One, search dogs behaving strangely. They'll catch a scent, they'll lose a scent. They'll follow it to a certain degree and then they stop. There's nothing. They'll look around and then they never catch the scent again. That is a very, very common, I feel almost exclusively with these cases, is that these search dogs behave strangely and that cadaver dogs are unable to find corpses. The body, number two, the body is found in an area that has been searched before, like with Joe. When I saw that and I was thinking about the case of Joe, I was really struck by that, because that being a common characteristic is so scary. Because if you're a person who, I'm not going into a national park any day soon, but the frightening aspect that even if you go missing and people search exactly where you were, you're not going to be found until a year later in an obvious spot where it was searched, but you weren't there at that time, is terrifying to me. And in some of these cases, these areas have been searched up to hundreds of times before the body is found. A lot of the victims travel uphill if they're on a mountain instead of downhill. The missing are often found at high levels of elevation, like mountain peaks, or that Devil's Peak, where that small child had been at the top of this impossible to climb rock formation. Weather-related phenomenon. So here you go, ASMR Gold. Shortly after an individual goes missing, the forecast takes a drastic turn. Torrential rain, lightning, fog, sandstorms, blizzards occur and delay the search parties. Missing clothing, which even is with the Charles McCullough one I just did. Shoes, pants, shirts, and jackets are often removed. And one of the explanations for the Charles McCullough thing was they said perhaps he was in hypothermia, where you feel like you're roasting, but you're actually freezing to death. And maybe that's why he had taken off his shirt and had undone his belt, and taken his boots off. But then again, you have to go back to the fact that it was impossible for him to even get there with the 7 feet of snow. They're even removed on children who were too young to do so themselves. Paradoxical undressing cannot explain why a person would do this in a temperate environment. Right. So it's the summer, right? Or it's the spring. Why are they taking their clothes off? That makes no sense. And sometimes the clothing is found neatly folded. And I don't know why, but the care that it took to neatly fold the clothes, that sends like a shiver down my spine. There's high amounts of plane crashes. Search planes and helicopters seem to crash abnormally high rates during these specific cases. And how about the one you were talking about, where the pilot raised his hand and said, "Hold on, I can't do anything right now. It's going to be a few minutes," and then inexplicably went straight forward into the side of a mountain, killing 3 people. Pilots don't want to kill themselves. They want to make sure they have the safest flight possible, right? Whenever you get on a plane and people are afraid of flying, you have to keep in mind that these pilots are on the plane or the helicopter as well. They also went to land safely. So to suddenly jerk forward into the side of a mountain, killing people, is especially unusual. Let's see. And they said that a lot of people taken are on the extreme ends of the intellectual scale. So sometimes these are psychiatrists or doctors, physicists, and sometimes they are people who have a disability, who are on the spectrum, or maybe they have Down syndrome, which is interesting to me to think about that. Because if you were an alien life form, if you were looking down that direction, perhaps they would be more interested in the different spectrums, not just your regular average day intelligence, because they would maybe want to know about the highly educated, and then the people who are on a spectrum or have Down syndrome, to maybe they're interested in that. A lot of people who go missing are of German ancestry. So if you're listening to me right now and you are a psychiatrist who also happens to be German, I would not go into a national forest if I was you. Boulder fields and granite. And this is interesting. We were talking about this yesterday in our production meeting. A high number of men and women vanished in boulder fields or areas with huge quantities of granite. Yosemite National Park is the largest of all clusters and also happens to be the biggest source of granite on Earth. And wasn't it you, Jeremy, who was talking to me about the granite situation? Right. That there's a lot of UFO sightings around places that have a lot of granite and that have thermal water, such as Yosemite National Park, who has the okay, Jory, what's the word for these things?
Geysers.
Or geysers. Thank you for not letting me go in the weeds.
Well, you did it before. I figured I'd just go ahead and save you the trouble.
I appreciate it. So, with the combination of the geysers and the granite situation in Yosemite National Park, which also has the largest amount of people missing, although they don't know how many because they don't keep track. They can tell you how many bears they have, how many foxes they have, but they can't tell you. I just do not know how many people have gone missing. It's a mystery. So it's interesting that this place has a lot of UFO sightings and activity. And also, the next one is that the victims are retrieved near a body of water, which also goes with my Joe story because he was on a trail in between a stream and a mountain. A lot of people are berry picking. I haven't read any cases about the berry picking. Have you, Jory?
Uh, no, not really.
And it says that a lot of people who go berry picking go missing at a greater rate than anybody else.
Really?
Don't if you're German, if you're a German psychiatrist who needs some berries, go to the store. Also, being last in line. And I don't know why, but this strikes me as funny because I think this is something that as humans, we all think about when we're in a line, right? We all think about that. You are in a line, and if I was on a tour going through a national park or pretty much anywhere, it always strikes me that I hate being the person bringing up the rear. That person in every movie is always the one, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it says here about one of the most reoccurrent of all traits are those in a group who happen to be the last in line. And one of the stories, the story about the boy who was on the devil's uh, whatever I said that was. It was funny because him and his mother and father were walking along a creek and he was behind them when he went disappearing. So that sends a chill down my that really sends a chill down my spine too because somebody's at the end. Um, Others who were the missing report seeing them mere seconds before and suddenly before they vanished without a trace. No one ever reports hearing any sounds of a gasp, a scream, or an animal for the people that are last in line.
Hmm.
Not a gasp, a scream, or an animal. And that's the top characteristics they have in common. The National Park Service employs, and here's another thing while we're talking about money, Jory, when we were talking about money and closing down a National Park Service, the National Park Service employs 20,000 Americans and brings in an annual revenue of, are you ready? Are you ready for how much one boy's life costs?
Ready?
$92 billion a year.
Oof.
$92 billion. Are they going to close the national park down? No, we'll never see it happen.
No. Wow.
Yeah. And ASMR was talking about how she went to Yosemite. I think you said earlier that you went on your honeymoon. Is that correct? And she said it felt very creepy to her there. I've never been. I can't see me going. But um, this, if people listening have never heard these stories about these missing national park victims, I encourage you to go look into more of these. There are a lot. And it is scary. The amount, and Another thing, only 10 states require you by law to report a person missing. Only 10 states. 40 states you can go missing, and nobody's legally required to say that you've been missing. So these national parks in these states aren't required to list you as a missing person by law. So think about that. A lot of this adds up to something is very wrong. And like I said before, there are cases, obviously, there's going to be cases of people who walk away from their life, just leave their car and walk out of the park and you never see them again. There are people, obviously, there could be some kidnapping cases. Obviously, there are people who are severely depressed. But then there are cases like the ones we've covered today, where bodies are placed back, or say they saw an alien, or the military is called out, that cannot be explained by those excuses, and especially these children. So if anybody has any comments they'd like to add, or any questions, or anything they'd like to talk about, now is the time to do that, and we will discuss them. And while you're doing that, I'm going to take the time to say that next week's podcast will be with my co-host Rob, and we're going to be talking about cryptids, which is also going to include Bigfoot again. We really had a good time talking about folklore, so we decided to do folklore with a twist and do the cryptids. And I think that's going to be very interesting and a lot of fun. And I found out that the lake I grew up swimming in every summer, every day of every summer, there is supposedly a cryptid that they say lives in this lake. So I'm glad I know that now and not then. And the week after that, we will be moving to Twitch. So if you haven't already, please go sign up for your Twitch account. Follow me, twitch.tv/the exit light. Is that correct, Jeremy? Okay, so go follow me. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun because our first podcast is going to be on Twitch, is going to be about conspiracy theories. And that is a subject we can all dig real deep into. Plus, we're going to be having all three co-hosts for that podcast. And it'll be a lot of fun. We'll have a lot of different opinions and a lot of information. So I hope to see you there. Let me see. I'm looking to see if there's. Oh, ASMR Gold says that there were missing people pictures posted in the hotel she stayed at in Yosemite. And those are only the people that are willing to tell you about. Also, I have can't think of the word. Help me out, Jeremy. Patreon. I have a Patreon. It is absolutely not necessary to donate to the Patreon. My content is free. But if you're interested, the link will be below. And I have a Facebook page. And Maya will put the link to that. I have a Twitter page. Maya will put the link to that. My UK co-host Rob has a Facebook page. And he keeps up with all kinds of different paranormal and supernatural things on his page. And he also does for my page too, which I greatly appreciate. So if you're interested, and I know you are, go take a look at those pages. And Jory is going to be starting his YouTube page up soon. And I know you guys will be excited to know that. Go ahead, Jory.
Yep, still in the works. Still trying to get everything smoothed out and figure out timetables and subjects and all that fun work.
Well, I know
But
they'll like it.
well, I hope so.
And ASMR Gold says we need to read up on the Trenny case, and I will. So, and good night to you. And if that is it, I guess we will say good night to everyone. And I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. And I hope to see you next week. And I can't wait till we go to Twitch. Jeremy's going to have a lot of fun during the production side of Twitch. And we will upload that to Facebook as well. And I really appreciate your support. And thank you, Jory, for being my co host tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everybody who stuck around and commented on the chats. And hopefully, it was an eye opener, and hopefully, we'll see you all again next week as well.
And I'd like to thank moderator Maya. Thank you, Maya. And thank you to my producer, our producer, Jeremy. Thank you for all the hard work you do. And I hope you guys sleep well tonight. Good night.